reconciliation with Iran. And now we have Michael Klare is going to speak. He's a professor from the 5 colleges in Western Massachusetts.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Our host here didn't say I have a new book out, and I'm on a book tour, and my publisher browbeats into me, Michael, you have to, use every opportunity. So my new book is The Race for What's Left, The Global Scramble for the World's Last Resources. It was published last week, and I think there are copies on sale here, and I'm not very good at this, but the publisher says I have to do this, so you'll forgive me. So I'm going to talk about the strategic dimensions of Iran and American military thinking. And Iran plays a rather central and extraordinary and rather bizarre place in American military thinking that goes back a very long time. I was thinking about it just now. The first instance in which Iran played an important military role in U.S. thinking was during World War II, when it was a bridge for the U.S. to provide lend-lease support to Russia, the Soviet Union. It was the crucial means by which U.S. provided oil and weapons to the Soviets in their joint effort to defeat the Soviet Union. But there was because the previous Shah had been friendly with Germany, and the British occupied the southern part of then Persia, the Soviets the northern part of then Persia, and the agreement was they would both leave at the end of World War II, and Persia would resume its independence. But then, at the end of World War II, the Soviets refused to leave the northern part and declared a Soviet-style People's Republic of Southern Azerbaijan in the northern corner bordering on what's now Azerbaijan and the Azerbaijani Soviet Socialist Republic. And this triggered in Harry Truman's mind a fear that the Soviets were aimed at taking over the oil of the Persian Gulf. And the oil of the Persian Gulf had become a strategic concern of the United States during World War II, when Franklin Roosevelt forged an oil for protection alliance with the Saudi royal family. And this then became, after World War II, one of America's, and to this very day, America's most important foreign policy issue, strategic issue in the world, is protecting the oil flow from the Persian Gulf. It began with FDR. And the Soviet occupation of southern Azerbaijan was seen by Truman as a threat to this crucial interest. And it triggered a series, and he then started mobilizing military forces. This was the very first crisis of the Cold War. Mobilizing military forces to drive Soviet troops out of Persia. The Soviets got nervous, they withdrew. But Truman saw this as the next stage in world history, and it led him and his advisors to what they were afraid of was that the Soviet thrust was not Eastern Europe, but the Middle East and its oil. But they were afraid to paint things that way. So they concocted what became known as the Truman Doctrine, that the world was embarked on a global struggle between freedom and democracy and communism and totalitarianism. This became the basis that drove the Cold War for the next 50 years, or whatever it was, 40 years. But it began in Persia. And Persia then became an important area for the U.S. The U.S. then intervened next in 1953 in Persia, again for oil, when the democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, had nationalized, and this is a story I'm going to talk about later today, the Anglo-Iranian, then Anglo-Persian, Anglo-Iranian oil company, known to us today as BP. Now it has invaded the United States. But then its primary source of wealth was Persia, Iran. Mossadegh nationalized the BP, and this was seen as this was the first and most important nationalization in the Middle East, seen as a threat to American power and the wealth of Western corporations in the region. Oil corporations had to be smashed. So the British Prime Minister came to President Eisenhower, and they concocted a covert, illicit intervention in Iran to overthrow Mossadegh and reinstall the Shah, and led to a 11, 12-year dictatorship of the Shah with U.S. backing that involved the persecution of the Shiite clergy who were opposed to this secular monarchist, who jailed all of the clergy, many of the leading clergy, exiled Khomeini, tortured and killed many of the Shiite clergy, who in turn became adamantly hostile, of course, to the Shah, but to his American protectors. And that legacy of hatred of the U.S. and this memory of the tortures in the Shah's jails, the beatings, all with equipment provided by USAID under the police support program, is a big part of why, to this day, the Shiite clergy still detests the United States. The U.S. got next involved militarily in Iran in the Iran-Iraq War that Lila spoke about, 1980 to 1987. Because of the hostage crisis and all of that, we viewed Iran as the greater enemy than Iraq. And so the U.S. supplied Iraq with weaponry, intelligence, money, all kinds of assistance. Sure, well, you may not all know, but the U.S. emissary to the Saddam Hussein was Donald Rumsfeld, acting as Reagan's personal emissary to Saddam Hussein, delivering the intelligence information that helped the Iraqis target Iranian forces in the field. But then the Iranians started attacking Kuwaiti oil tankers because the Kuwaitis were helping to finance the Iraqis. And the U.S. then, in line with the, I skipped a step, which was, so I have to go back and rewind the tape. After the revolution of 1979, President Carter issued his famous Carter Doctrine, January 23, 1980. Any threat to the flow of oil in the Persian Gulf is a threat to America's vital interests, will be resisted by any means necessary, including military force. Right, now reel forward, 1986, the Iranians are attacking Kuwaiti oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, and President Reagan declares this is an instance of the Carter Doctrine being threatened, and we're going to intervene. And so the U.S. Navy was sent into the Persian Gulf to escort Kuwaiti and Iraq and Saudi oil tankers, and this led to a U.S. in an undeclared war with Iran, 1986, 87, 1988. The most tragic event of that, in addition to, there was the U.S. engaged the Iranian Navy in warfare, an event that everybody has forgotten, not the Iranians. But the most tragic event there was when an Iranian airliner on its way to Mecca was shot down by the USS Vincennes, a cruiser, thinking it was a fighter plane, and something like 250 Iranian civilians perished as a result of that incident. U.S. intervention turned the war against Iran. Iraq emerged victorious. Saddam Hussein, thinking he has friends in Washington, megalomaniac that he was, invades Kuwait. Operation Desert Storm follows. Now, once again, we're on the verge of war with Iran. I always, it's hard not to get the Irans and the Iraqs mixed up. So my question, what I want to use my time for, is why now? Why Iran? What's at stake? For all this time, 1946 through Mossadegh, through the Iranian Revolution, through the Iran-Iraq War, in the years after, it was very clear that the issue was oil, protection of the oil flow. And indeed, when the Iranians have said over the past few months that they're prepared to close the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow passageway over there that connects the Persian Gulf with the Indian Ocean, 1/3 of all tradable oil goes through there every single day. By tradable oil, I mean oil that's available on the open market. Without that, the world's oil market collapses, world economy tanks. This is the most important strategic point on the entire globe we're talking about, bar none. So the Iranians have threatened to close that, and like all previous American presidents since Roosevelt, or Truman in any case, President Obama says, that is a casus belli. We will go to war if you do that. And so we are at a point where a war with Iran is highly possible over that piece of geography. But is it about oil? That's what's on my mind, and I'm going to take a few minutes to speculate about this, but I look forward to the conversation with you. With the Carter Doctrine, it was very clear. With Reagan and the first Bush, it's very clear. It was the protection of the flow of oil essential to our economy. But the U.S. economy is not dependent anymore on Persian Gulf oil. China gets more oil from the Persian Gulf than we do. Japan, by far, gets more oil. Certainly Europe gets more oil. So in my mind, this is about power, not oil. Who controls the Persian Gulf, controls the flow of oil of the world, therefore has their hand on the economic jugular of the world's economy. And it is the intent of the U.S. leadership, Democrats, Republicans, liberal Democrats, far-right Republicans, and everybody in between, bar none, that the U.S. and only the U.S. and nobody but the U.S. have that control over the oil jugular. So this is about power in my mind. And it's not just any objective. It is the most important objective for the U.S. post-Cold War. During the Cold War, America's claim to be a superpower, to be the most important country in the world in the West, was as the barrier to Soviet expansionism, as the most important power protecting Europe, our allies in Asia, Japan, and so on, and everywhere else in the world. We were the great barrier to Soviet invasion and assault. Well, those days are over. You know, that legitimized NATO, the Atlantic Alliance, CETO, CENTO, U.S.-Japan alliance, U.S.-Philippines alliance. Everything hinged on that concept. But that's gone. What does a superpower do? A country that has superpowerdom in its blood, in its nervous system. What do you do without that great threat? Well, I believe that for the United States, what keeps that superpower identity intact and keeps the U.S. leadership believing that they have a superpower role in the world is to control the flow of oil from the Persian Gulf and use that as a lever over all other countries, China, Japan, and Europe, and everyone else. Not for our own use. It's not for the oil that we consume. It's to control the spigot and therefore control the rest of the world. And this is what motivates, I believe, U.S. assertion of power in the Persian Gulf. It's not about an existential threat. It's not about Israel. It's not about oil. It's about an assertion of power by an aging, somewhat, inadequate feeling, aging superpower trying to demonstrate it is still the most powerful country in the world. And Iran is the designated enemy that has to be kept on a harness. This is my view. I call it post-superpower stress syndrome. Call it whatever you want. And President Obama, any American president, I don't care who he or she is, in the position today, in the political environment in Washington, any American president has to be prepared to go to war with Iran in order to preserve American dominance in the Persian Gulf, because we have no other identity as a great power left to us in the world today. This is a must. You cannot back down from that. There is no retreat from that. Now, the Iranians understand this, and they have learned from what happened to Saddam Hussein. And I think that this is what motivates them to seek the capacity to make nuclear weapons. Now, I use my words carefully. Seek the capacity to make nuclear weapons. They are not, so far as anybody knows, making nuclear weapons, but they are certainly seeking the capacity to make nuclear weapons, because once they had nuclear weapons, if they go down that path, it'll make it that much harder for the U.S. to intervene. The U.S. cannot allow them to become a nuclear power, because that would destroy America's remaining superpower identity. Do you see that? Once Iran has nuclear weapons and the U.S. can't attack Iran for fear of retaliation, America as a superpower is virtually finished. And that is an unacceptable future for the American foreign policy leadership. It is intolerable to them. Therefore, war with Iran is, if Iran goes down that path, if either Iran moves towards getting nuclear weapons or closes the Strait of Hormuz, there will be war. Because if you're afflicted with post-superpower stress syndrome, that is the only response you're capable of. I'll finish with that.